Go to running back. Higher, Josh Jacobs going against Pittsburgh. You got him as your RB4. That's 2 above the experts. So it's not like if you have Josh Jacobs, you're not starting him, but you just like him a little more based on the matchup. What?
Yeah, it won the matchup against Pittsburgh, the top 3 matchup for running back so far this year. For whatever reason, TJ Watt on that D-line, he's great at getting to the quarterback, but he plays so aggressive. Oftentimes, it actually given up the most points so far to running backs as I look and dive into this. I get it's a small sample size, but 166 yards on the ground so far. Jerome Ford ripping off big plays against them. I do think this is going to be the Josh Jacobs coming out party. And I did want to highlight him just as one of my favorite buys right now. If anyone in your league is panicking on Josh Jacobs, he hasn't had a huge day yet. 9 and 10 PPR points, running back 29 and 24 to start the year. But you look at the underlying usage. He had 100% of the carries last week until they were completely getting blown out in the fourth quarter. Zamir White rumbled in a little bit and then fumbled the ball right away. So I imagine 80% and 74% of the snaps through his first 2 weeks is 73% and 64% of the carries. And again, 100% of the carries when the game was somewhat in questions, and a 27% target share last week. We're seeing even better usage than what we had last year for the running back 3 in fantasy. We saw last year he started slow, the holdout in camp that often plays into a slow start. I think this is the matchup where we get Josh Jacobs getting right. And there have been shockingly a couple sit starts. Like, do I have to bench Josh Jacobs? No, please do not. And if you can somehow, if his owner's desperate, worried about the big pick they spent on him, I'd send if I'm you, truth, like your Mostert's having such a hot start. I know no one's going to trade Mostert for Josh Jacobs straight up, like Mostert and Mike Willie, something of that nature. I really think Jacobs is due for a massive eruption. It's such a concentrated offense. That's what we want to be a part of. So I expect Jacobs to continue to thrive here and not continue to really pick it up and actually start to thrive.
Another guy you got on your higher list, you got Najee Harris against the Raiders. You got him as your RB18, 4 spots above the experts. Again, I guess if you have him, you're starting him. And I know you got some tweets from some guys that we like that are basically been like, hey, he's better than you think. Man, I don't want anything to do with this guy.
And I think that's the large sentiment. And in general, I don't want anything to do with Najee Harris. In fact, the whole thesis behind him the last 2 years was volume. And now we're seeing a 53 and 58% snap share. It's not what you expect from Najee Harris at all. But I will caution you, these were 2 of the toughest matchups that you could possibly have for running back, especially San Fran in week 1. It's not a good look for running back. Yeah, he doesn't look great. He doesn't pop off the page. I understand that too. But I also think the Raiders, 3rd most points allowed to running backs, 135 on the ground, and in particular, 8.5 receptions allowed to the running back position. Now, maybe that favors Warren. I do have Warren 5 spots above the ECR. Maybe this is the game he just fully takes over and sends Najee to the bench. But as bad as Najee has looked, like eyeball test-wise, apparently, according to some advanced analytics, he's higher than Najee Harris in rush grade. He has more yards after contact per attempt. He has more missed tackles forced per attempt. This team wants to continue to run. 10% of his runs have gone for 15-plus yards. He's on a list with only Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, and Gus Edwards, who we're about to talk about. So there have been signs that he isn't quite as horrendous as people think. It's such everybody hates him. And my eyeballs tell me this guy isn't anything special at all. But he has had, again, such a bad schedule to start the year. I could see this. Similar, Josh Jacobs is going to be much tougher to buy. I think you could get Najee Harris for a bag of peanuts at this point, given how the public sentiment is just bashing him to shreds. And I think there's some underlying stats that suggest maybe he's not quite as bad as we think. And maybe he ends up having a solid game in his first soft matchup of the year and turns this thing around. I'd take a stab at it and see if I can get him. I just think it's gone a little overblown for how bad he is.
Would you rather have Jerome Ford or Najee Harris?
Probably Jerome Ford. I mean, better offense, more explosive player, in my opinion. I'm not saying I love Najee. I just could see a nice rebound this week. And if it happens, I would be selling as hard as I could too. So I'm not. If you can buy him as cheaply as possible right now, go for it. But if he has a big game and you're stuck with him and you can try to sell him after it, also go for it too. I know I'm sending a little bit mixed signals here. I'm torn on the guy because he does not pass the eyeball test at all. But I think the sentiment is a little bit more negative than the actual situation might be.
All right, another guy you're high on, we've mentioned him a couple times now, and you mentioned him just a second ago, Gus Edwards going against the Colts. And the big thing about Gus Edwards, and I've heard you say this, I've heard other guys I like on other podcasts say this. Gus Edwards kind of sneaky with the 4th best yards per carry in the history of the NFL, behind Bo Jackson, Jamal Charles, and Nick Chubb. That's not nothing.
No, it's good company to be a part of. He's never had below 5 yards per clip in any of his career seasons. The man just gets it done, and it's not always sexy, but he falls forward. He's a great touchdown scorer, and he had a split snap last week with Justice Hill. In fact, he was lesser favored than Justice Hill, playing only 47% of the snaps, but they gave Justice Hill the first crack at the goal line. He did not convert. They go to Gus, and he just pounds it right in like he always does. And now with Justice Hill banged up, maybe a little bit more receiving work. He's not the prettiest receiver either, but he has gotten it done there. And I like Kenyon Drake. Actually, I've always been a kind of a Drake fan. They bring him in, and maybe he gets slowly worked in, but this is his first week with the team. Melvin Gordon's completely washed at this point. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see about 20 touches if the Ravens get up big on this Colts team, given that they have such a bad secondary. I know they're much more of a pass funnel than a run funnel, this Colts team, but I could see a big lead from the Ravens and then ultimately just bleeding clock with one of the more efficient rushers that this league has truly ever seen, which is so ridiculous to say, but it's actually true. And Gus Edwards, I like him. I think he's a starter this week. Absolutely, you can toss him in your lineup.
It is ridiculous to say, and at the same time, it's not like a super small sample size. Like, he's been doing it for 5 years. So anyway, for whatever it's worth, maybe you could win a bar trivia bet on something like that one of these days. Lower. Probably don't need to talk about this first guy because we've already raked him across the coals a bunch, but Alexander Mattison against the Chargers, RB32. Somehow the experts have him 14 spots higher at RB18, which just seems insane to me. Obviously, you're lower on him.
I don't understand how he's rated so high because all you see is negative tweet after negative tweet, and deservedly so. The man has seen 78% of the work, and he's averaging well under 3.5 yards per touch. It is absolutely horrendous what Alexander Mattison is putting out there on the field. And I get it. Like, volume has its place at running back. It absolutely does. It's more so a running back driven position is so volume dependent, but not when it's this bad. Like, he is just so inefficient with his 8 carries, 28 yards, 3 catches for 11 last week. And it just looked so bad. And the Vikings overall, as great of an offense as it is, even with Dalvin Cook last year, it just isn't a great environment for running backs. Kevin O'Connell, when he was calling plays with Sean McVay and the Rams, they just didn't nurture a running back system there either. And I just imagine they completely ride the arm of Kirk Cousins in this one, facing off against Justin Herbert, one of the worst pass defenses in the league, a pretty bad run D too. So maybe Madison does fall his ass into the end zone. But there's just the only reason to play this guy is the fact that he's playing 70% or more of the snaps. And now with Akers here, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he starts slow, which he will, Madison, and they just at least give Chandler, give Akers, give somebody else a case to make their claim. So the fact that he is, a top 16 running back in the rankings when he is just so bad. Again, 3.3 yards per touch on 78% of the touches, 83 yards. Oh, it's just so hideous. I don't get it. I don't get why he's going to continue to see any work. I think this could be the week, as early as this week, that they turn the keys over to somebody else, maybe Akers.
Zack Moss going against the Ravens, RB23, 5 spots below the experts. Anything to dissect there?
Yeah, I mean, he was such a popular play last week, and it made sense. Houston, among the worst defenses in the league, and he showed up. 18 carries, 88 yards, a touchdown, 4 catches for 19. So a lot of people, he's got to be right in the radar, especially after 98% of the snaps. Deion Jackson didn't even touch the field. The one time he wasn't on the field was an empty backfield set. 86% of the rushes. Only Anthony Richardson touched the ball as a carry other than Zack Moss. And now, whether he plays and he opens up the cutback lanes, that's a good thing for Zack Moss. If Minshew plays, it means, more goal line equity for Zack Moss. But this was against the Texans again, one of the worst run defenses of last year. That's carried over to this year. I think the Ravens completely smother this offense, at least early on. And if this game does get game flowed out, well, they had the lead all the game against the Texans. I wouldn't be shocked to see Deion Jackson, a capable receiver, start to work in a bit more, a good pass protector as well. And maybe we get every snap for Zack Moss, and we can ride that to something usable. But this matchup is so much worse than what they faced last year. The Ravens giving up the 5th fewest points to running backs at only 11.8 to the entire position right now. I don't imagine Zack Moss has another blow up in him. I think he's going to be fool's gold as someone that everybody's recommending right now.
Another guy whose talent, in theory, we love, Damien Pierce, at Jacksonville this week, RB31, 4 below the experts. Not a huge discrepancy, but As much as we like the theoretical talent of Pierce, at some point we got to see something, right?
Yeah, I mean, 49 and 47% of the snaps. The reason we loved him was, he's suddenly going to get the pass catching role based on his preseason usage. That turned out to be a myth. Mike Boone had to work in week 1. And then when he was out in week 2, Dare Agbanula coming in for 20% of the routes. So it's just a hideous situation for Damien Pierce. It's a team that's always going to be playing from behind. And if he's not going to see that meaningful receiving work, certainly not against the Jags, I expect them to have any type of positive game script here. And just overall, the line so banged up right now. 4 of their 5 starters have been out, and I think maybe 1 might be returning this week. So the holes haven't been there. The receiving role hasn't been there. And certainly the touchdowns in this bad offense have not been there for Damien Pierce. So a part-time player in a bad running environment right now, I want nothing to do with it. I'm sad about it. I thought he was going to break out in a big way this year. It's not happening, and certainly not against the Jags this week, who have held running backs to a bottom 10 matchup as well.
All right, Hail Marys, talked at length about this guy. You gave me quite an education on him. And based on what you told me, seems a little crazy that Kendre Miller is 22% rostered.
Yeah, the Jags actually the 3rd worst matchup to running backs so far this year. I thought I knew it was bottom 10. I didn't realize it was that tough of a matchup. That D front has really played tough. But yeah, Kendre Miller, only 22% rostered. I think that should be 70% rostered at this point. I might be streaming him in my flex, given my injuries to Saquon and Austin Eckler at this point. I love the player. He was one of the studs at TCU, the engine to that offense. When he got hurt in that final game, you could really see the impact that it had on this team. He's physical. He can catch. He was making highlight plays as a receiver throughout the preseason. We know Kamara's out still. We know Jamal Williams is likely to miss this game as well. So a 3-down back. Tony Jones has mentioned one of the worst running backs in the entire NFL. And the Green Bay Packers give up the 6th most points to backs. It's similar to the Texans situation. They have been just a bad run D for multiple years straight. The definition of a run funnel defense. I think this would be a great test for him. If you need him to stream, great. And if he does well, maybe he does become that big back. Or if Kamara sucks throughout the year, as he did last year, I don't think he will. I think Kamara will rebound big. But should he suck again, there's a chance that he ends up taking this backfield over Kendre Miller. So regardless of whether you need to start him or use him or just stash him, I think Kendre Miller belongs on so many more teams here. And then Craig Reynolds, 2% roster. Kendre Miller, I'm the tough guy that he's not available in my league. Back to tough waiver man. If Craig Reynolds, though, is out there, there's no way tough waiver man doesn't have Craig Reynolds out there in his league. 2% roster at this point. And that's because David Montgomery likely to miss this game. And when he was out, small sample size, only about 2 drives, but Craig Reynolds did handle 60% of the rushes. He's a hard-nosed runner, no nonsense. Doesn't do anything flashy, but just constantly moving forward. In his limited usage, he's always impressed. And I do think we'll get about 12 to 15 carries, goal line equity as well, as Jahmyr Gibbs continues to fill more of a receiving role. I could see Craig Reynolds being a big fliggin. Now, they did sign Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight, one of my favorite players, waiver wire guys of last year. So if he ends up taking over that big back role, that wouldn't shock me, and Reynolds would be completely useless. But for now, it does seem like the in-house guy is Reynolds, and I think they'll give him the chance. I expect him to do okay with it. He's always played well when he's gotten opportunity.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.